Something evil's lurking in the dark. Under the moonlight, you see a sight that almost stops your heart. You try to scream, but terror takes the sound before you make it. You start to freeze as horror looks you right between the eyes. You're paralyzed, 'cause this is thriller, thriller night, and no one's gonna save you from the beast about to strike. Thriller, thriller night, you're fighting for your life inside a killer thriller tonight. You hear the door slam and realize there's nowhere left to run. You feel the cold hand and wonder if you'll ever see the sun. Now is the time, and hope that this is just imagination. But all the while, you feel the creature creeping up behind. You're out of time, 'cause this is thriller, thriller night, and no one's gonna save you from the man with the 40 eyes. Thriller, thriller night, you're fighting for your life inside a killer thriller tonight. Night creatures call and the dead start to walk in their masquerade. There's no escaping in the jaws of the alien this time. This is the end of your life. They're out to get you. There's demons creeping in on every side. They will possess you unless you change that number on your dial. Now is the time for you and I to cuddle close together. All through the night, I'll save you from the terror on the screen. I'll make you see. Now this is thriller, thriller night. Yeah, I can thrill you more than any ghost would ever dare try. Thriller, thriller night, you're fighting for your life inside a killer thriller tonight. I'm gonna thrill you tonight.
Darkness falls across the land. The midnight hour is close at hand. Creatures crawl in search of blood to terrorize your neighborhood. And whosoever shall be found without the soul for getting down must stand and face the hounds of hell and rot inside a corpse shell. The foulest stench is in the air, the funk of 40,000 years, and grisly ghouls from every tomb are closing in to seal your doom. And though you fight to stay alive, your body starts to shiver, for no mere mortal can resist the evil of the thriller. Ladies and gentlemen, Mark Ward and Colleen Cherry. And please help me welcome to the stage behind me, the Suncoast Storytellers. Let me ask you, how many of you have been to Tampa Theater before? Oh, okay. And how many this is a very first visit? Oh, welcome, welcome. Okay, so you probably don't know that you're sitting in one of the most haunted buildings in Tampa. Tampa Theater has been here since 1926, and in the 97 years since, we have become regarded as one of the most haunted buildings in the Bay Area. There are 6 ghosts that we know of and that we tell the stories about, and countless more that call this place home. In fact, those of you who are sitting right back there are near our man in the fedora. But don't worry, he's nice and he loves a good show, and that's what we're going to put on tonight. Now, since the beginning of time, humans have gathered around the campfire to tell stories. It feels safe here, where the light is and the warmth. But off in the shadows, your eyes can start to play tricks on you. You're not really sure what you see just beyond the trees. And it's right there that we're going to be tonight, as we welcome these storytellers to tell some of their spooky tales. Tonight, we're going to start with Monica Cordry. Monica is an award-winning teller of tall tales with Toastmasters International. She is a Tampa Bay entrepreneur, and she is immersed in the world of fiscal affairs. But tonight, she's going to take a little bit different turn and tell us a story of eternal love at the dawn.
My story tonight is as much of a love story as it is a ghost story, but who doesn't love a good romance? Are you all familiar with the Don Cesar Hotel on St. Pete Beach? It's kind of a landmark. The locals call it the Pink Lady. I always secretly thought it looked like a great big Barbie dollhouse with its pink turrets. But did you know that it's haunted? It all starts with a wealthy Londoner named Thomas Rowe. He was well-educated, well-traveled, and he loved the opera. He went to see a show in his hometown London called Maritana, where he laid eyes on the most beautiful raven-haired woman he'd ever seen. Her name was Lucinda. He was so enamored by her. He managed to meet her after the show, and they fell head over heels in love with each other. They spent every waking moment together. They used to go to this fountain in a courtyard, and that's where he proposed to her, and she accepted. The plan was, after her last performance, they would meet at the fountain, and they were going to run away together and get married. So that night, Thomas waited and waited and waited at the fountain, but Lucinda never showed up. It turns out that her mother did not approve of this relationship, and she whisked her daughter away and sent her home to Spain, where she was forbidden to ever see Thomas again. Poor Thomas, feeling like his heart had just been ripped out of his chest and thrown on the floor and stomped on. He did what many people do to try to escape sadness. He traveled. He went to America. He went to the sun, Florida, St. Pete Beach, where he came across 80 acres for sale. He snatched them up and he started furiously building this beautiful pink palace, this monument to his love of Lucinda. He built and built and built. It was only going to be 110 rooms, but then he said, no, I'm going to make it 220 rooms because nothing is too good for Lucinda. He spent $1.25 million, and you got to remember, this was back in the 1920s. He was 300% over budget, but he didn't care. He wanted it to be perfect, just like her. He named it the Don Cesar de Bazin, who was the protagonist in the opera where he had first laid eyes on her. And he even reproduced the fountain and the courtyard. And then he wrote letters, letter after letter after letter, hoping somehow that she would get word of his hotel and that she would come. Now the Don Cesar is known for being the playground of the rich and famous. We're talking movie stars, bootleggers, mobsters. Al Capone stayed there. Lou Gehrig, F. Scott Fitzgerald, every single president after Franklin D. Roosevelt. What I'm saying is that it was really successful. Even the Depression couldn't hold it down. He had a deal with the New York Yankees, and he stayed there every season for spring training. But as successful as it was, he would still just sit there on his balcony on the 5th floor, staring out at the shoreline, praying that she would come, or he would walk up and down the beach, sadly vowing to never, ever love again. Finally, one day, a letter came back from Lucinda's parents, but it was not a happy letter. Lucinda had died, some say of a broken heart. But she did leave him a note, and the note said, "Time is eternal. Sorry, time is infinite. I wait for you by our fountain. Our love is eternal, and our destiny is time." Well, Thomas died in 1940 without a will, and the hotel just kept changing hands over and over. It fell into disrepair. At one point, it was slated to be demolished, but miraculously, it reopened again in 1973 as a hotel. And that is when all the stories about the hauntings started happening. Thomas and Lucinda never met again in real life, but they definitely met in the afterlife. Just ask anybody who's ever worked at the Don Cesar or stayed there. There are so many stories about spooky but heartfelt encounters with the ghosts. People see apparitions on the beach all the time. A man walking in a white suit. And the description fits Thomas exactly. He used to always wear this white Panama suit with a white Panama hat. It was kind of his signature. And when they get close enough to him, he just disappears. A widower tells a story about that he got married and they had their honeymoon at the Dawn, and they went back every single year, and they always stayed in the same room. And after his wife died, he thought he would honor her by carrying on the tradition, so he went, and he was so sad. He was walking on the beach, and then he saw this couple ahead of him. The man in the white Panama suit and the raven-haired woman in the pink caftan. They were holding hands and frolicking in the sand and just talking and laughing, and they were obviously so much in love. He tried to get up closer to them, and then it looked like they weren't really touching the sand. They were kind of just hovering, floating above it. And he kept trying to get closer, and then he looked around the beach to see if anybody else was there, because he wanted to say, "Hey, is anybody else seeing this?" But when he looked back, they were gone. And when he went to where they were, there was no footprints. All the staff at the Dawn, they say they always get this prickly feeling down the back of their neck, like they know they're not alone, especially on the 5th floor, which is where he lived. They're often seen together, Thomas and Lucinda, at the fountain, in the courtyard, just strolling through the lobby, holding hands, and he's often seen by himself at the front door, the entrance, just waving to his patrons, to his guests, welcoming them into his hotel. And the staff say that sometimes when they got their hands full, they're holding a tray or carrying heavy bags, the doors open by themselves, and they walk through, and then the doors close, because he's a friendly, helpful ghost. And even in death, he's a perfect businessman and a dedicated hotelier. So if you want to come and see Thomas and Lucinda, if you don't believe me, come to the Don Cesar Hotel. And always remember these words: time is infinite and love is eternal. They live there together now. Thank you.
Way to kick off an evening around the campfire with a story of love. But when I look at this next title, I don't know if those feelings are going to continue. Our next storyteller tonight, Donald Dowridge, a new storyteller to our show this year, and the author of the book Motivational Moments. He's a professional speaker who focuses on personal executiveship. But tonight, he's telling us the story of the undead brain.
Dateline, July 3rd, 1988, Louisville, Kentucky. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a Friday evening, the day before July 4th. Bert, who is the boss, if you will, he steps in to tell his worker, if you will, Frank, I'm leaving. Frank is training Freddie they call him, young guy, young kid. So anyway, Bert leaves for the weekend. Frank is showing Freddie around and giving him instructions as he trains him. So as they go back to the office and they're sitting there, Freddie asks Frank a question. He says, has anything ever happened weird here since you've been working here? Frank responds and says, that's a good question. That's a good question, son. Quite naturally, it has. As a matter of fact, come go with me. Let me show you something. So Frank takes Fred down in the basement, and as they get in the basement, they walk towards some containers. The containers are locked. And on the side of it, it says, property of the Department of the United States Army, and there's a number, 1-855-645-800, if you will, or 8,000. So Freddie, he asks Frank, he says, are they contained? He says, yeah. So Frank, he winds up going and getting some bounty tissues. Now I know you all know that bounty is the cooker picker up. So he goes and he gets some Windex that really squeaks your windows clean. So as he's spraying and he looks, and as he looks down, they look down, Freddie looks, and he sees this, looking up at him. And he says, oh my God, what is that? So, and then Fred asks, he says again, I notice it's airtight, right? So Frank says yes. Well, what does Frank have the nerve to do? He taps the side and all type of gases spew out. As the green gas come out, Frank and Fred, they are attacked by the gas and they fall out. When they wake up sometime later, they go back to the container and they notice that the zombie is gone. And he says, so Frank says, oh, well, I guess the moisture of the air dissolved the monster. So they felt kind of comfortable until they started walking away. And as they started walking away, they noticed off in the back there, coming out of the shadows, it was that same zombie. And he said, brains, brains, I want your brains. So Frank, he gets crazy, like, what did we do? What did we do? We unleashed the monster. Well, they ran. So all of a sudden, Frank calls her, the boss. He comes back and he says, what have y'all done? Well, Frank says, Herb says, we got to get rid of this. So they takes him over to the next building, which was a funeral home, to cremate him. As they go to cremate him, guess what happened? The fumes from this creature goes up in the air. Now you got some teenagers in the cemetery partying. Well, as this air makes its way to the cemetery, guess what, ladies and gentlemen? These zombies come to life. And it's about 100 of them. And they're like, brains, brains, brains. And these kids are petrified. These zombies, they're everywhere. As a matter of fact, Frank, Fred, and Bert, and Ernie, who is the mortician, they're locked in the building because these creatures are coming at them. Well, Frank, out of nowhere, he says, we got to get back over to the medical supply building so I can get the number. What number, Frank? The number off the container so we can call the army and we can get rid of this. Well, we can't get over there. Why? Because of all the creatures out there. Oh no, I don't want to die. And they start breaking in, and as they're trying to break in, quite naturally, they grab to the building, he noticed that there's still another creature over there. So what he does, he turns into no other than Babe Ruth. He hits a home run with his head. And he managed to get to the bone. When he gets to the bone, he calls. And on the other side of the line, he hears, "Who is this?" "This is Frank. How can I help you?" "We need your help. I got your number off of the side of the container." "Oh, where are you located at?" "Louisville, Kentucky. We're being overran by zombies." "Don't worry. We'll take care of it." Well, ladies and gentlemen, they took care of it. The general called to the air base and told them, he said, "We got the rabbits." "Oh, great." "It's not great because the rabbits have escaped." And next thing you know, you hear 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, boom! A big explosion. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that explosion marked the end of the zombies. And the what? Praise! Because it's a thriller! Thriller night! Thank you.
Call your friends in Louisville, they're not okay. Our next storyteller this evening, a veteran here at Campfire Stories, is Ellen Strike. Ellen is a recognizable holiday performer who has appeared in many venues, has told stories for thousands of people, but even more importantly is a force to be reckoned with, a volunteer at the St. Petersburg Christmas Toy Shop. Tonight, though, we're not telling about things that are holly jolly, I don't think. In fact, she's going to be telling us about room 326 and answering a very important question. Does your hospital have spirit?
Good evening. There is a hospital here in the greater Tampa Bay area that is widely reported to be haunted. Now, if you drive by this building, it doesn't look creepy. It's not like a haunted house with spider webs and things like that. It looks perfectly normal. And if you go inside, you're standing on the first floor, nothing seems amiss there either. But the difficulty starts when you get on an elevator and take it to the 3rd floor. And when the elevator doors open, you might notice that it's a little bit cooler than it was when you got on the elevator. Or you might catch a whiff of a non-hospital type odor, like maybe smoke or, I don't know, smelly, stinky, rotten fruit. You might find a chill just passes right through you. No particular reason. The source of this is said to be room 326. I should say it used to be room 326 because you see, room 326 no longer exists. It is said that it was so terrifyingly haunted that it was completely sealed off, boarded up, erased from the hospital's inventory of available rooms over 35 years ago. However, the entity that still dwells in that area is so strong that its powers can be felt throughout the entire 3rd floor. Mysterious events occur, strange sounds, alarms going off in vacant rooms. Maybe the hair on the back of your neck or your arms stands up for no reason, or you have the feeling that you're being watched. You see, like many hauntings, this one started slowly, almost unnoticeably over a period of weeks. The nurse would go into room 326 and notice that the supplies were low, so he or she would go refill the supplies. Go off on the rounds, come back 10 to room 326 later, and some of the supplies would be gone. Well, obviously another staff member needed that tape or those gauze pads. This was closer than the supply station. Or they might go in and find that the machines, the monitors and the IV machines were not working. or they were giving erroneous readings, or maybe even though they were still humming and beeping, as those machines are apt to do, there was no reading at all. Now, these machines do go bad sometimes. They need maintenance and repair, so we'll just write that up. These sorts of things happen. But that all ended on one unbelievably frightening and deadly night. That night, the nurse, her name was Nora, she happened to have been on the same shift the night before, so she was looking forward to the fact that she knew some of the patients and was familiar with their records and thought that this would be an easier shift. So she started out and checked on her rooms, and she got to room 326 and pushed down the handle to go in, and the door wouldn't open. The handle went down, but the door wouldn't open, and she tried. And she tried a third time, and it would not open, and she thought, oh, great. This is not a good thing. I've got to put a note to maintenance for this. There is an emergency going on in there. We would have some real trouble because we can't get in there. So she said, I'm going to get in there no matter what. And so she planted her feet on the ground, and she put her shoulder, and with everything she had, she managed to get that door open just wide enough that if she held her breath and sucked it in, she could get into the room. And then she looked behind the door to see what was blocking it. And there was nothing there. Well, she went to tend to her patient after making a note that maintenance needed to check this door. And she was shocked when she saw him, because even though she had just seen him the night before, he looked as though he had lost 20, maybe 30 pounds in just 24 hours. He looked awful. He was pale. His eyes were sunken into his head. She thought, oh, this does not look good. I've got to make sure the doctor comes in to see this man. And as she was taking care of things, checking all the machines and making sure the IVs were working, she noticed that the room was getting chilly. And she pulled her sweater a little tighter around her and took care of business. And as she was leaving the room, she checked the thermostat, and it said the right temperature. It was set correctly, and it said the room was the right temperature, but she just felt that it wasn't right, that there was something wrong. So she made an additional note for maintenance to come and check the air conditioning as well. And she left the room and went on about her rounds. Well, not too long later, the alarm for room 326 started going off. And as quickly as she could, and we all know in hospitals that's not always fast, but as quickly as she safely could, she went to room 326. She expected the door to be a problem, but this time it opened immediately. And as she stepped inside, she gasped, because the entire room was in disarray. The closet doors were open, the patient's personal items were scattered around, the supply cabinet, everything was messed up. The sheets that had been on his bed were hanging from the windows. The furniture was all over the place, but the thing that alarmed her the most was that the patient's bed had moved so far from where it belonged that his IVs and the monitor wires for all of the machines were stretched to their absolute limits. And immediately she knew that the most important thing to do was to get that bed back where it belonged and make sure that the IV lines and the monitors were still working. And as she touched the bed to move it, there was a flash, and she got an electric jolt, and her patient sat straight up in bed. And he opened his eyes, and he looked directly at her. And she saw that his eyes were red, not bloodshot, red, with little yellow flames where the pupils should have been. She took a step backwards, and then her patient raised what was now an almost skeletal arm, and with a trembling hand pointed his long, bony finger to the corner directly behind her. And then, and he fell back and died. She was terrified, and she took a quick look behind her to see what he was pointing at. Oh! There was not 4 feet behind her a black form. It looked sort of like a human being, but the only The only characteristic was the eyes. They were red with the little yellow flames like the patient had had. And she screamed and she turned to run for the door, but the door slammed before she could get to it. And she turned quickly to see if the apparition was behind her, but instead, there was a window, just seemingly floating in the middle of the room. But the view was horrid. What she saw through this window were faces with red eyes and flames, and there was an odor that smelled. It just made her gag and cough. She had trouble breathing, and then this roar came from the window, and she started to back up, and then she felt this force, and it was pulling her closer and closer to the window. And try as she might, she found that she was just getting closer, and her heart was going so fast, and she couldn't breathe, and she thought, oh my gosh, I'm gonna die here. And so she just pulled all of her inner strength together as best she could, and she jumped back, and she was able to break that force. And she turned to run to the door, but the door opened before she got to it, and she felt herself being flung from the room, and then the door slammed behind her, and she heard it lock. And she just stood there, pale and trembling with fear and cold, and her heart was still beating so fast, she thought that it was going to come out of her chest. And without giving any thought, she fled from the hospital, got home as quickly as she could, went to her bedroom, locked the bedroom door, went to bed, covered herself with everything she could find. Because she was so cold, she felt like she would never be warm again. And she spent the night not closing her eyes, not sleeping, just laying in bed and trembling, knowing that she had come so close to hell. Well, the next morning, maintenance went to room 326 to check the door and the air conditioning. And the maintenance man expected that there would be some problems with that door, and he was right.